Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the colloquio, and especially Jose and Harold for the invitation to come in Rio. Actually, I haven't been here for 5 years, so it's a great pleasure for me to be back at IMPA. So the topic of my talk today will be a joint work with Jae-Gyong Choi from Seoul in Korea. And as you see in the title, it will deal with minimal surfaces in a slab, and I'm going to talk about a problem which, as far as I know, has been considered only very recently, but that seems to me quite interesting. So let me first state what is the problem I'm going to consider. So it will be about minimal surfaces in Euclidean space, and I will consider a slab that is consider two parallel planes say horizontal in R3. And we want to minimize the area among compact minimal surfaces with boundary, compact non-planar minimal surfaces with boundary in the union of the two planes. Okay, so we have two planes. And I look at all minimal surfaces with boundary in the union of the two planes. So it's a kind of free boundary problem in the sense that the boundary is not prescribed. The only thing I require is that the boundary is something lying in the union of the two planes. And of course, I have to exclude planar. I have to exclude part of planes. If not, the problem has no interest. Okay? And there is no condition about the topology, for example, or the number of ends, or the genus. But what is kind of unusual in this problem is that the class of surfaces in which we want to minimize the area is a class of minimal surfaces. Usually in these kind of problems, we want to minimize the area among all surfaces, satisfying some condition. But here we require to minimize the area among minimal surfaces. Of course, if you want to solve this problem without assuming that you're minimizing among minimal surfaces, it is obviously not interesting because you can just consider a cylinder of radius very small, and you see that the infimum of the area of such surfaces is 0. So that's why in this problem we require to minimize among minimal surfaces. Okay? So as far as I know, this problem was considered very recently by Jacob Bernstein and Christine Breiner, and they prove an interesting result regarding this problem. They prove the following. So theorem. By Bernstein and Breiner. They prove that if you minimize among embedded minimal annuli, then the minimum is achieved by a stable unstable catenoid. So let me explain. So among embedded minimal annuli, the minimum of the area is achieved by the vertical maximally stable catenoid, maximally stable catenoidal waist, which is symmetric with respect to the middle plane. Okay, so let me explain. So you have these two planes, and I put a vertical catenoidal waist, which is symmetric with respect to the middle plane, and which is maximally stable. So it looks like this. I'm going to explain what it is maximally stable later. And so they claim that, they prove actually, that among all minimal embedded annuli, then the minimum is achieved by this surface, and it is the only one achieving the minimum of the area. So first, let's start with an observation. If you want to consider pieces of catenoids, pieces of vertical catenoids, then what can you do? If you look at pieces of catenoids, you have two parameters. So the slab is fixed. Say, for example, that the slab is between heights A and minus A. So you have your piece of catenoid. Okay, you take a piece of catenoid in the slab, it gives you an example of an annulus. But you can, for example, translate up the catenoid. It will give you another piece of the same catenoid. So it's good. Okay, you translate like that. This gives you another piece of the catenoid. And the other thing you can do, of course, is to scale the catenoid. You have you can always scale a catenoid, and this gives you other pieces of catenoids in between the two planes. For example, one like this. So among catenoids, you have a two-parameter family of solutions, and since everything is explicit, if you want to see which among the catenoidal piece has the least area, it's a simple computation. And it turns out that among this class of catenoidal waist, the best one is maximally stable. So what do I mean by maximally stable? Well, you consider a complete catenoid like that, and you take a point on the axis of revolution. Take a point P lying on the axis of revolution, and you look at the rays starting from P. The rays starting from P, some of them are tangent to the catenoid. So in this picture, for example, you have a ray like this, which is tangent to the catenoid. And of course, the picture is rotationally symmetric. So you have one on the top, and you also have one on the bottom. Okay? And so now, this piece of catenoids here, so here I have a circle of revolution, okay? Here also. And I claim that the piece of catenoid between this plane and this plane is a maximally stable catenoid. Why is this so? Well, in R3 you can scale. Okay? So if you scale a minimal surface, this produces a one-parameter family of deformation of a minimal surfaces. So if you differentiate this will give you a Jacobi function. So homothéties centered at the point P, they are generated by the vector field x minus P, where x is a position vector. Okay? And now you do the scalar product of this vector with n. And I call f this function. N is the unit normal to the surface. So for example, here I have n, and here I have my vector field, okay, x minus P. And this gives you a positive function by the very construction of this picture, which vanishes on the boundary of the annulus because the rays here are tangent to the surface. Okay? But this function here on the minimal surface is a Jacobi function because x minus P is induced by homothéty, and homothéty preserve minimal surfaces. So this comes from derivating a one-parameter family of minimal surfaces. So this gives you a Jacobi function. Okay? So this is a Jacobi function that is L of f is 0, where L is the Jacobi operator, okay, vanishing on the boundary. And with f positive. So this tells you that 0 is an eigenvalue of the Laplacian with Dirichlet boundary condition, okay? F is an eigenfunction for this eigenvalue, and since f is positive, then 0 is the first eigenvalue, okay? So here, it is stable, because it doesn't have any negative eigenvalue, and it is maximally stable because if you now increase a little bit your piece of a catenoid, then the lambda 1 will be strictly less, okay? So this one has lambda 1 0, and if you slightly increase, then lambda 1 has to decrease strictly, and so lambda 1 will be negative, and your larger piece will be unstable. So that's why we call this a maximally stable piece of a catenoid, okay? And so the result of Bernstein and Breiner says that among all embedded annuli, the best one is a piece like that, where the point P is actually the center of the catenoid, okay? So why is this one the best among all catenoids? Up to my knowledge, apart from doing the computation, I do not know a geometric argument from this. So if there were a geometric argument saying this, I think it would be quite interesting, but I don't know any such argument. Okay? So what is very quickly the idea of the proof of Bernstein and Breiner for this? Well, it uses an inequality by Osserman and Schiffer, so proof of Bernstein-Breiner. So uses an inequality by Osserman and Schiffer from 75, which has the following, that the second derivative of the length satisfies this differential inequality, where L here denotes the length of a level curve of a fixed given height. Okay, so you see this as a function of the height. L is a function of the height. And Osserman and Schiffer inequality shows this differential inequality. Okay, and using this, they are able to prove by standard computation of the area, some tricky computations, they are able to prove the result among the class of embedded annuli. Okay? And this inequality is quite difficult, actually. It's a very fine argument using Weierstrass representation of this catenoid. So what I'm going to do in this talk is we want to try to get the result without supposing that the surface is an annulus. We want to minimize among all minimal surfaces. So unfortunately, we are not able to prove the conjecture. We will need, as I will explain, we will need an extra assumption among the class of minimal surfaces. So in some sense, the result is somewhat disappointing, but I think the proof is rather interesting because it's quite, as you will see, it will be quite elementary. So let me explain the hypothesis that we need. So we will try to enlarge the class of minimal surfaces. So no assumption of topology. Maybe we will have a genus or several boundary components of the ends, okay? But we will need an orientation hypothesis. So first we assume that the surface itself is oriented. Orientable, but let's say oriented, okay? Orientable, and we choose an orientation. Sigma is orientable, choose an orientation. And now I will look at the level curves, at the level sets of the surface. That is the set satisfying that the height is constant on this set. So what do these sets look like? Well, generically, they look like a union, a disjoint union of closed curve. Okay? So let P be a horizontal plane in the slab. Okay, that is Z will be between minus A and A. Okay? Then generically, the intersection of sigma and P is a disjoint union of closed curve. And I will orient these curves so that the conormal is upward. So my surface is oriented, so it has a sense to speak about the conormal, and I choose the conormal so that, I choose the orientation of the curve so that the conormal, compatible with the orientation on sigma, is upward. So it's just a convention of orientation. It's not important. So we orient these curves so that the conormal is upward. But now we look at these oriented curves in the horizontal plane. And in this plane, it has a rotation number. And this rotation number, maybe it can be positive, negative, or 0 even. And the assumption is that all these rotation numbers have the same sign. Either all positive for all planes and all curves, or all negative for all planes and all curves. I will give you examples. So assumption, all rotation numbers for all P and all curves are positive or all negative. So let me give an example of a surface satisfying this hypothesis and two examples of surfaces not satisfying this hypothesis. Well, the very trivial example is just if you take just an annulus. Of course, all the curves, for example, if this one is oriented counterclockwise, then all the curves, by continuity, will be oriented counterclockwise. So in this case, it is trivial. But now look at this surface, for example. Okay? So imagine that you have two boundaries on the top, like this. One boundary on the bottom, and some genus. Now I'm going to look at the level sets without in the first time considering orientation. So the bottom one is just two curves. Okay? And if you go a little bit down, then these curves, they will be closer and closer each to other until you reach a critical point of the height. Here you have a critical point of the height function, okay? And at this point, the level set is singular. It looks like this, okay? And then if you go down, you have just one connected component. So it looks like this. And you go down until you reach another point, another critical point of the height, and again, it separates like this into two curves. So here in between, you have again two curves, and they join again when you reach the lowest critical point. Okay? And then you just have one curve. So now if you follow the orientation, you'll see that everything works. For example, imagine that this one is oriented like that. Then by continuity, you will follow the orientation. Okay? This you follow the orientation. And what you see here is that all curves are counterclockwise oriented. So this is good. This satisfies the assumption. Now, a counterexample. A counterexample is something like that. You have two top curves, but imagine that one is inside the other one. So for example, you have genus here, and here you have a kind of catenoidal stuff which goes here. But it's inside the outer stuff. So this does not have the good orientation, so let's see why. Is this clear, this picture? Huh? You imagine like a genus 1 stuff, and you glue an annulus from the top, at the top of the hole, that goes, and at the top it is inside the larger boundary component. So now look at the level curves of this. At the top, you get two circles, one between the other one. And if you go down, actually what happens is that this piece will get closer to this point will get closer to this point. And the same at the back, okay? And they will join. So at some point here, they join. And here, again, when you go down, they separate into two curves like this. And then they again join, etc. The bottom is not important. Let's just consider until here. Okay? You have two curves like this. This point goes closer and closer to this point, the same at the back, so that they joint. I can make, if the picture is symmetric, they join to the same height. And then they separate like this, where you have two curves. And then they join again. Now look at the orientation. For example, if this one is oriented like that, then this one is oriented like that by continuity. And this, by continuity, this one will be oriented like that. And so you follow the orientation. And so this one will be like this. This one will be like this. This one will be like this. And what happens here? Here, this one is like this. So here, by continuity, this one is like this. And here, it is the contrary. Okay? It goes up like that. Here it goes up. And so, when you follow this, this circle will be oriented like this. Okay? So this is not good, you see, because, for example, at the top, you have one which is counterclockwise and the other one which is clockwise. So this does not satisfy the hypothesis. Unfortunately, this surface exists. So there is no hope to say that this kind of weird stuff cannot happen. It can happen. Maybe another thing that you can imagine, slightly simple, is just a genus 1. Just a genus 1 surface where you kind of do a tunnel from here to here. That is when the critical point here and the critical point here, and this one is on the top of, this one has higher height than this one. Again, this is a counterexample to the hypothesis. So this one, I don't know if it exists, but this one does exist. So the result that we have is that if we do this assumption, then the catenoid is the best one. So theorem. So among immense minimal surfaces, satisfying this assumption, the catenoid is the best. I mean, the maximally stable catenoid is the best. So, what is the idea of the proof? The proof is very elementary. It uses only Weierstrass representation. So let me first recall that if you have a minimal surface, then the height function is a harmonic function, okay? And so it has isolated critical points. So proof. Let me call Z the height function. Okay? So I will call U the height function restricted to our surface sigma. And V will be the conjugate harmonic. So V is multi-valued in general. But that's not very important because dV is well defined. And also, if I'm away from critical points, I can choose locally U plus IV as a complex parameter of the surface. You can always plug in the Weierstrass representation the height function to be Z, and you get a parameterization of your minimal, a conformal parameterization of the minimal surface. But this works, of course, always only away from critical points of the height, and this works locally. So locally, away from critical points, of the height, so W, which is U plus IV, is a complex parameter, conformal parameter. On sigma. And now, by standard Weierstrass representation, you can express the metric. The metric of the surface is given by ds square is cosh square of kappa times mod of dw square. Okay? And what is kappa? Kappa is the logarithm of the modulus of g, which we can write also as a real part of log g, where g is the Gauss map. Of the surface. That is a unit normal composed with stereographic projection. So it's a complex valued map. So this is quite standard stuff from the Weierstrass representation, so I'm not going to detail this. And if you look at the expression of cosh kappa, then it is 1/2 over mod g plus 1 over g, 1 over mod g. Okay? And so now we are going to compute the area and to apply a convexity inequality by taking the average of this function kappa on the level sets of the height function. So the idea is to take the average of kappa. On level sets, which I will call gamma c, will be the set of points of height c. So this is gamma c, which has some orientation. So what is the total variation of V along this curve? This is related to the flux. So the total variation of V, so it's the integral on gamma c of dV, which is dV is dz star. And let me call this minus f of c. But this is actually a constant. Why? Because it is related to what we call the flux of a minimal surface. When we compute the integral on a curve in a minimal surface, when you compute the integral of the inner product of a Jacobi function of a Jacobi field and the conormal to the curve, then you get a homology invariant called the flux. And so actually we can compute in R3 we have the Killing fields coming from translations. And so this gives you a vector called force vector, which is given by, on gamma c, the integral of gamma c of nu ds. And so what is nu? Nu is unit conormal, which by assumption is upward on my surface. So this is nu. So what is this? I can write this as the integral on gamma c of dx of nu, dy of nu, dz of nu, ds. But now if I want to introduce the conjugate quantities, then I can write this as integral of gamma c of dx star of tau, dy star of tau, dz star of tau. ds, and there is a minus sign here. And tau is just the tangent vector to the surface. Tau is unit tangent to gamma c. It's just the Cauchy-Riemann formula. But this is actually what we want. The last coordinate here, the integral of dz star of tau ds, is nothing but this. Okay? And since I have put the minus here, the last coordinate is f of c. So this is something, something, f of c. But as we know, this force vector is a homology invariant by Stokes' formula. So this tells you that this f of c is actually a constant, which is positive by our choice of orientation. So f by Stokes, f is a constant and positive. Okay? So now let's compute the average of kappa. Kappa is a harmonic function, so what you will get is also a harmonic function, but a harmonic function in one variable is nothing but an affine function. The only problem is that all we have done here only works away from critical points. So we will have to see what happens when we pass through a critical points of the height. Okay? So the average of kappa. So let me call h of u to be minus 1 over f times the integral of gamma u, h of c, sorry, of kappa of uv dv. Okay? So there is this factor here because by my convention I put a minus sign here. It's not important. If you differentiate this, h prime of u will be minus 1 over f times the integral of gamma c of kappa u dv. Okay? And so if you differentiate another one, what you will get is kappa uu, okay? But kappa uu, because kappa is harmonic, it's by this formula, kappa is harmonic. So kappa uu is minus kappa vv. But kappa is a well-defined function. So when you compute the integral on a union of closed curve of kappa vv dv, it will give you 0. So this is clearly constant, away from critical points. Of the heights. Now what is the slope? What is this constant? We apply Cauchy-Riemann here, and it gives you 1 over f times the integral of gamma c of kappa star v dv. And this is here where will appear the hypothesis on the rotation number. What is kappa star? Well, recall here that kappa is log g, the real part, log modulus of g, so the real part of log g. So kappa star is the argument of G. It's a multi-valued function, but doesn't matter a lot. So kappa is ln of G. So kappa star is the argument of G. So in other words, this integral here, you integrate on your set, on your union of closed curve, you integrate the derivative with respect to V of the argument of V. So what you have computed is a total variation on gamma C of the argument of V. So this is nothing but the total variation of arc G along gamma C. For gamma U, sorry, the notation is not good. Okay? You look how the normal has rotated along this curve. But this number is the same as the rotation number of the curve itself. So this number is nothing modulo 2 pi, times 2 pi. So this number is nothing but 2 pi times the rotation number of gamma u. Okay? So what I have proved here is that h prime of u is 2 pi times the rotation number of gamma u. I forgot to put minus 1 over f here. Okay? So that we know this, but this holds only in between two critical points of the height. So now what happens when you pass through a critical point of the height? Well, I'm not going to explain this, but it's not very difficult to see, using again Weierstrass representation, it's not very difficult to see that this function is continuous when you pass a critical point of the height. I'm not going to detail this. So h is continuous at critical points of the height. So in other words, h is a piecewise affine function. So it looks like something like that. Something like that. And we know the minimal slope of this because, recall our assumption. Our assumption is that all rotation numbers are either positive or either negative. So here, for sign convention, I will assume that all these numbers here are negative. So r minus r of gamma u is at least minus 1. So is at least 1. Okay? So this slope here, the slope of each piece is at least 2 pi over f. So we have a minimum slope. Okay? And now we are going to compare this function h with a linear function, an affine function, not a piecewise affine one. I'm going to consider this function, and I will call this kappa of u. So kappa of u has slope 2 pi over f, and it has the property that the absolute value of, k, the absolute value of k is always less than the absolute value of h. Here I draw the picture if this function vanishes, but it's very easy to do the same if the function does not vanish. So property is that h is greater than k, and k of u is affine, and slope 2 pi over f. And now I compute the area, and I use the convexity inequality. And how much time do I have? 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay.
So you can use it.
No, but it's. I'm almost finished, so that's good. So now the area of sigma. So recall that my first parameter is u, which is the height function, going from minus u to minus a to a. So I compute it just as the integral between minus a and a, or the integral of gamma u of the conformal factor times dw. And it gives you f times, cos square of kappa dv du. Now, by convexity inequality, I have a low bound like this. I do the average of kappa on U, and by convexity inequality, what I get is F times cos square of the average du. But now I can replace H by this new function K, which is affine. And I get this formula. But here, everything is done, because what is K of U? K of U is affine of some slope. So it has some form, which is very simple. K of U, I can write it as the real part of 2 pi over f times W plus some constant d0. Okay? But now I can write this as the real part of log G, log capital G, where capital G is just the exponential of this stuff. Okay? And now I will put this in the Weierstrass representation. I will put this G of W and 1 over G of W dW as Weierstrass representation, and it is well defined on, it is well defined modulo 2IF, modulo IF. So well defined on C, quotiented by IF Z. And I take this as Weierstrass representation, as Weierstrass data. And those who are very familiar with Weierstrass representation of minimal surfaces will recognize that this is the Weierstrass data of a catenoid. Okay? So in other words, if I now do the very same stuff for this piece of catenoid, I will get, as a result, exactly this. So in other words, I have proved that the area of the surface is greater than the area of this piece of the catenoid. Okay? So here's the parameter. The first parameter here is related to the flux of the catenoid, so it is a scaling factor. And this factor d0 here is just translating up and down the piece of catenoid. Okay? And so this gives you the result. And of course, if you want to study the equality case, well, you have equality everywhere, and it's very easy to see that it's only the catenoid that satisfies this. Okay. So I stop here. Thanks for your attention.